Modern scientific investigation of the shroud really begins at the dawn of the 20th century when a lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia takes a picture of the shroud as we see with the naked eye. See you've seen the negative pictures there above Mr. Chuck Neff, and also you've seen him in the entrance. So, well, late at night, you know, all alone, he develops his picture, and on the photographic negative, you see these poster size. And those were the days when you had the very heavy glass plate negatives. And he did the face first. He was just so stunned, he nearly dropped it. I mean, nobody was expecting that. In small part, this is, in several respects, this is an indicator of what you find with the Shroud of Turin. He discovered this by accident. And his positives revealed for the first time that far more information is in that cloth and in that image than was ever seen with the naked eye. And you'll see this happen time and time again. When the scientists discovered the three-dimensional aspect of the shroud, it was pretty much by accident. When any kind of modern technology is applied to the shroud, all kinds of information is available. For example, on the blood marks. I'll hope to show you some pictures of some blood marks, but it may not happen. But you're familiar with the blood marks. And they literally run from head to feet on the front and the back of the man. Only in 1978, when they put ultraviolet fluorescence lighting on the blood marks, did they see serum, clear serum around the borders. This is exactly what happens when human skin is wounded. The blood mark forms, it flows, it coagulates, and then it exudes serum around the borders. That's its way of stopping the bleeding. And you find them around the edges of all of the blood marks. I'll pick on the scourge marks since they're the most numerous. There's about 100 of them. When you take the scourge marks on the positive images and you put them under a photographic enlarger and then look at it with a magnifying glass or under a microscope and with UV light, you see they're slightly upraised with slightly indented centers. That's exactly what the barbell shape is like, and that's exactly what human skin, how it would react and how it would look on the positive, not the negative. And that's how the man looked when he lied in the tomb, on the positive image. And the serum surrounding borders are there. And a forger could never have seen any of this stuff. And if he'd gotten just one out of 100 of the scourge marks wrong, it would betray his work as a forgery. And believe me, not one of the conservatively 130, some people count a couple of hundred blood marks on the shroud, not one of them has ever been duplicated. They appear in cloth in the same shape and form as they appear on a body. This is far more difficult than you realize. Dr. Lin engaged in a year's worth of really ingenious experiments, and you could never encode the blood mark into the linen so it looked the same in the cloth as it did on the body. They're not broken on the outsides. They're not smeared. They're coagulated. How you gonna mash them into that linen without breaking or smearing or the edges or anything like that, and keep them in the same shape and form? They're not just encoded, they're embedded in the linen. When you look on the reverse side of the shroud, they look darn near the same as they do on the inner part of the shroud. Human whole blood serum, human hemoglobin, human DNA, human albumin, human immunoglobulins have all been identified on the man in the shroud. The blood marks align perfectly on the positive image, not the negative image. Think one of the things a forger would have to do, when you look at the cloth with the naked eye, the sepia colored one, the blood mark is on the left side of the man. By the way, the Gospels doesn't say what side that Jesus received his post-mortem side wound. If a forger was going to do this right, he would have to encode the blood mark on the left side so that when the positive image was developed 500 plus years later, that it would land on the right side, which is the correct side. The right auricle fills with blood after death, and when you pierce it at the location that the blood mark is clearly seen on the shroud, with a computer you see the line. If you just put it at any kind of an angle, it would pierce it, and the largest quantity of blood on the shroud would come out of the man and run down to the small of his back, and pericardial fluid would also follow. Blood and watery fluid from a post-mortem wound. By the way, that wound matches the Roman lancia that the foot soldiers used. And those were the ones that the crucifixion executioners were recruited from. But this kind of study, just among others, I'm just giving you a slight bit of the overall evidence, indicates this is a real human being. All the anatomists, all the pathologists, all the physicians who study this, they say this is a real human being. The Roman flagrum does match those scourge marks, by the way, and those are excavated examples of the Roman flagrum. All of the wounds, the blood marks, the bruises, you can see on the positive images, he's been hit around the face. Look at the eyes, there's just real swelling there. Correspond precisely to the human body. The body's actually in rigor mortis that's set in the crucifixion position, and it remained that way until his image was encoded. At minimum, if you were going to duplicate the hundreds of blood marks that are on the shroud, at minimum, you would need a real body to do that, who bled and human whole blood serum is released around the edges. And one of the things about the blood marks, they're still red. Well, if a medieval forger painted it 700 years ago, it wouldn't be red, let alone 2,000 years ago. Cut yourself shaving. Within an hour, you've got that purple, scabby color on your chin. It doesn't stay red. As soon as it hits the air, it starts oxidizing. It doesn't stay red. You've heard Bob talk about protons and neutrons, and that is where the leading edge of the research is, and where all the research indicates this. If it's radiation, it may be particle radiation. Neutrons are the only demonstrated agent, if you will, that if you radiate 36-hour-old blood that's coagulated and then artificially age it, and from time to time expose it to UV light, which is like sunlight, like the shroud would have received over the centuries in outdoor exhibitions, the blood stays red. So far, that's the only demonstrated agent that can keep ancient blood red. Barbet and Vignon also spend decades trying to duplicate the blood marks on the shroud. When Bob talked about, well, you know how all the ancient linens and all the apparel in your closet and all the dead people, they've never had a body image. There's never been any blood marks like this on the shroud. The blood marks are actually harder to duplicate, I think, than the body image. Some aspects of the body image have been duplicated, but others haven't. I'll try to talk about some of the features that also indicate why it's radiation. Remember this is some of the superficial aspect. Think of your arm as a thread, and think of a hair on your arm as a fiber. That's the analogy. Probably hundreds of fibers, well, thousands of fibers comprise a thread. The body image is only on the topmost one or two fibers. The color is uniform and 360 degrees around. And the coloring is only on the outer edge of this fiber. And where two fibers cross, it's white on the underlying fiber. And if you cut a fiber in half, an image fiber in half, it's white on the inside. Tell me something other than radiation that can do that. These are individually encoded fibers, really. You couldn't possibly paint this. And that's separate and apart from having to stand 8 to 10 feet away from the cloth and everything else. But I'm just giving you a little hint. That's just the tip of the nose up there. There must be thousands, probably tens of thousands of body image features with all these figures, all these characteristics that I just mentioned along the length and the width of the frontal and the dorsal images. Tens of thousands. It encodes not only skin, but hair, perhaps coins and flowers, skeletal features. An agent like radiation could encode over different surfaces like that. When Secondo Pia takes the picture of the shroud for the first time, it's hanging on a wall in a beautiful ornate frame. When he takes the picture and he's in his darkroom, only the detail comes out on the body image. The frame on the negative looks even duller. The wall looks even duller. The background, the off-image area, there's no detail on that. Only the body image has the detail. They didn't know it at the time. This was not only the first indicator that radiation or some type of photographic process is involved. This is an indicator that the source of the radiation is that body. If some type of photographic process is operating when this happens, you know, a camera will collect the natural light or the artificial light within the viewing square, and whatever that light is captured on through that square on the film is shown. But there's no outside of a tomb. If it was standing on the inside of a tomb, the source, what I'm trying to say, is not outside of the shroud. The source is inside the shroud on the bottom part that the body laid, the back and legs laid on, and the part that covered over him. The exterior has none of these famous qualities. These are all common sense regions that the source of this radiation is the body. Actually, thousands of tests have been done on the shroud. Only one result is inconsistent with its authenticity as Jesus burial garment. That's the radiocarbon dating. Bob mentioned that neutrons will create carbon-14 atoms. And these would not only be found in the linen, they'd be found in the blood, the charred material. They would be counted and added into their calculations, but this will give you a wrong calculation. Every scientist, they've been studying neutrons now for about 80 years. Every scientist will tell you, yes, if you irradiate something with neutrons, it will increase the carbon-14 content. Well, I'll come back to that in a moment. This is a little example how technology reveals more things on the shroud. If you take all the greatest works of art, they're not going to look at how you start off with the image you see with the naked eye. In the middle picture, you apply this what is now the simple technology of photography to it. You look at the increase in the everything you see and the quality of everything on the image. Then put it in what is now getting to be ancient technology of computer imaging that shows the accurate relief of a three-dimensional image based on distance. It actually makes quantum leaps in development. They've never seen this before. This is just one little example of what technology reveals with the shroud. To get more to the summary of a point, there's about 33 features, very either unique or remarkable features that are found on the length and width of these images. And only one agent, radiation, can duplicate or account for all of these features. When we consider that, all 33 unparalleled features are found exclusively throughout the length and the width of the shroud's frontal and dorsal body images, that both full-length images are found only on the inner parts of the cloth that drape directly over or laid directly under the crucified dead body, and that only radiation can duplicate or explain all 33 body image features. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to wonder if these image features aren't due to radiation. I'm summarizing decades of research, but the one form of radiation that best duplicates the measurable features on the shroud is proton radiation. Protons and neutrons are the basic building blocks of matter. And while, at least today, you cannot absolutely prove that protons cause the body images, you can prove that neutrons not only radiated the shroud, but you could prove the amount of neutrons everywhere that it hit the shroud, and you can prove that the source of the neutrons was that dead crucified body wrapped in the shroud. Now you're talking about a miracle in several respects. Scientists, while they discovered neutrons and they can generate neutron radiation, they could do that in the 20th century, but they need a nuclear generator. They can't make it generate from a body. They can't make it generate from your little finger, let alone generated from the length and width and depth of a dead body. Protons and neutrons are held together by the strong nuclear force. It's the strongest force known to science. For those to be released throughout the length and width and depth of that body, and we're just talking the tiniest fraction though. Bob said it was 1 in 10 billion. You're talking about another order of a miracle. I don't know how many levels are involved in that. It's just beyond us. But you could prove that occurred. And that's what I say when I mean test the shroud at the atomic level. You could prove that. They would be, the proof would be all over the cloth. Neutrons make unique signatures. And they would make billions of these signatures in a dot of blood, or maybe a postage stamp size piece of linen from the shroud. Neutrons, and this is known, neutrons create radioactive atoms. Radioactive atoms virtually do not exist in nature. Radioactive atoms can only be created by a stream of neutrons or neutron radiation. If you examine the shroud at the atomic and the molecular atomic level, if the cloth lay exactly like it did now, nice and neat, the least amount would be at the corners, farthest away from the body. Okay, the next least would be as you went in from the corners, but once you got near the feet, then they'd start increasing. After that, when you shot up the edges of the sides, you start getting closer to the bulkier parts of the body, the thighs, the hips, the belly, the chest. They'd start to increase even on the sides. Now, the shrouded, first century burial tombs were very small, tiny, and cramped. Probably the edges and the corners are scrunched in there, and one of them lays alongside of it, lays over that U-shaped bench. But the middle part, where all the draping and the three-dimensionality, vertical directionality is, that was probably pretty good. As you went in with your samples, the number of radioactive atoms that aren't in your shirt or anything like that would increase. You'd be able to tell, you could take a sample anywhere and you could tell the number of regular atoms and the number of radioactive atoms that are in that cloth. There's 3 radioactive atoms of special importance. You could tell it for every piece of sample, and you'd find such a correlation, especially with the MCNP codes that Bob was mentioning, and it is just so complex to get out to try to describe in the brief time I have, but you could easily establish a correlation. There would be a correlation on the body as well. In other words, the shins would have a small amount of these radioactive atoms, but the thighs would have more, the abdomen would have more, the chest would have even more. And on the back side, neutrons, they're the opposite of protons in many respects. They would go right through the cloth. They'd hit the hard surface of the limestone rock bench. They'd rebound back onto the cloth and get another shot at being captured within the other atoms. That's how it happens. But you'd find more on the dorsal side. The blood marks, you would have even more. The blood is richer in chemical elements, much richer than linen. And so you'd have many more radioactive atoms in there. You could prove the cloth was irradiated with neutrons, and the source of neutrons was the body. There's two radioactive atoms that have real long lives. 99% of those radioactive atoms would still be on the cloth if it was irradiated in 2000. There's another radioactive atom of even more interest, and that's carbon-14. Scientists didn't even know how carbon-14 was created. Carbon-14 is created in the atmosphere. Neutrons are generated as a result of the constant bombardment of the cosmic rays. And it's created in the atmosphere. I'm not going to get any more complicated than the next sentence. The carbon-14 is absorbed in carbon dioxide and then taken in by photosynthesizing plants and spread very evenly throughout the biosphere. However, if you take this same product of the biosphere, linen, which is made from flax, and you irradiate it from any other source, you're going to create more neutrons. And of course we mentioned this to the radiocarbon scientists, and they all said, well, every scientist has to admit this is a fact. These radioactive atoms are created at known rates, it's so true, and they disappear at known rates, and they're all well known. Well, now you would know, because you already know it was irradiated, and you know how many neutrons hit every little piece that you sampled. You would know how many extra carbon-14 atoms were created. Now you could calculate its real age. And scientists could also calculate when this event occurred. This is really something, because it's the radiating event that leaves all the other evidence that I'm talking about that we quickly went over, but it's the evidence of all the events comprising the passion, crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection to this human body. All of a sudden, you would have evidence for the most important events in all of history. Stop and think about it. You would have something, these events are the same, in the same sequence, are the definition of how you might acquire life after death. When in human history have we ever had objective or independent evidence of a route or a path to acquire life after death? We've never had that. And we've never had objective or independent evidence for the central premises of a religion or a philosophy. This was stunning to me. I was an agnostic. And there's no philosophy or religion that has any objective evidence. I maintain you have thousands now with the Shroud of Turin. If you tested the cloth at the molecular level, I'm not even going to be able to talk on that but a minute if I'm lucky, you could have millions more unfakeable items of evidence. You would know what every fiber consists of right on across the fiber. You would know everything that's on every fiber, and the same thing for the blood marks, the scorch marks, the water stains, the side strip, whether the shroud was invisibly rewoven or anything like that, or anything on the cloth. But you would have a stunning amount of objective and independent evidence. Most of all, it's unfakeable, and it goes to the essential questions of why religions formed in the first place, and there would be other benefits over time. Think of the wars and conflicts that are going on right now that are just expanding, and the weapons that the combatants can use is growing at the same time too. Why not put our resources into nuclear research of this nature, as opposed to putting our resources into or the world putting its resources into nuclear research for very destructive purposes. The maxim is true, unfortunately. More wars and conflicts have occurred throughout history because of religious differences than any other cause in the world. And these differences today, religious differences, underlie most of the wars. You would address these as well. And I think it's a win-win situation for everyone. I'm obviously got to quit, but why not look with logic at the most important questions there are? It also relates to the existence and nature of God. These are things no one's ever had objective or independent evidence for. When we walk out of the parking lot, we're going to use our logic and common sense 10 times so we don't bump into each other or get hit by another car or take the right route home or stop at the red light. You use logic and evidence in everything you do hundreds of times a day. Why not start doing this for the most important questions? The evidence is so extensive. You would have something on the order of 1 billion to nothing shutout if you measured it on objective and independent evidence. We're at a new point in human history, and we should seize the moment. Thank you.